Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you find your unique teaching style. My goal with this podcast is to share helpful tips, strategies, and to give you the motivation you need to gain momentum in your teaching so you can continue being the music teacher rock star you already are. Welcome to episode 72. I am so excited to talk to Elizabeth Caldwell today. She is the blogger at caldwellorganizedchaos.com, and she is amazing. I follow her on Instagram. We connected in the music education blogging world, but I follow her on Instagram. And what I love about Elizabeth is she doesn't just post about music education, but she does that. She's amazing. She posts a lot about how she plans and planners she uses, but also about restorative practices and about school climate and behavior management, even if you work in the toughest of school situations. And so a little bit more about Elizabeth. She's been teaching elementary general music and choir for 12 years, and she has led several trainings on general music curriculum design. She's published her own curriculum, and she talks a lot about restorative practices, school climate, and behavior management for elementary teachers, not just music. She grew up moving around a lot, but spent most of her time growing up in Japanese public schools, which I find fascinating. And she talks a little bit about that in this podcast episode that you'll hear in just a minute. And she currently teaches general music and choir in a K-6 school with an under-resourced, high-trauma student population of primarily Black and Latina students. This conversation about restorative practices in elementary music is amazing and something that I have been looking forward to talking about for a long time. And I know you're going to find so much value from listening in. So let's go ahead and just jump right in with today's conversation. I introduced Elizabeth in the intro, and I'm just so excited to have her on today. And you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. So Elizabeth, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, I'm, really excited to be here and talk to you too. It's been a long time coming, so I'm happy to be able to chat with you. But I've been teaching elementary general music and choir and instrumental groups and things like that for 12 years now. I'm going into my 13th year this year. I've taught all over the world. I also grew up all over the world in my own schooling. And I'm currently teaching in a under-resourced school with mostly minoritized students. And I'm teaching elementary general music. I have K-6 and choirs as well. So that's my current situation.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today. So the first thing I want to ask you is, and you can say more than one, but I love starting off the interviews by asking this. What is your favorite thing about teaching music?
Yeah, it's so hard. That's one of those questions that I remember getting asked in job interviews,
Right.
and I now ask other people when I interview them for jobs and stuff too. And I always it's like it's one of those questions, but because it's really just such a passion for me overall. But I think um, I really believe strongly that music plays such an important role in children's schooling
Mhm.
experience specifically. And so I really love being able to play that role in my students' lives and being able to have all the experiences that we have in the classroom together and watching them grow over the years and all of that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it all.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I always say that one of the awesome things about, well, one of many things that's awesome about being an elementary music teacher is you do get to see them grow up and
Mhm.
you get them all the way from little to when they're older if you're there long enough. So I think that's really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we're going to have a conversation today about some awesome things I'm really excited to talk about. But the first thing I want to talk about is we're going to have a conversation around restorative behavior management. So
Mhm.
I want to start off by just asking you if you can explain to our listeners what that is or what that means to you.
So, first of all, I would call it it's restorative practices is kind of the umbrella, and then within that there is restorative justice, which some people have heard of as part of the criminal justice system, and it also sometimes comes into schools, but mostly in secondary education. It doesn't really happen as much in elementary schools. But restorative practices in schools is focusing on so when you're looking at fostering character in students, and I really have gotten away from using the term management
Mm-hmm.
when I'm talking about this subject. I'm still working on what because I have terms that I like, but they don't always. Then when I use them, people don't really know what I'm talking about. So I'm kind of in a weird place right now with that. But I don't like to use the term management so much because it makes it gives the impression that what we're doing is managing whatever is happening in the room, like in a reactive sort of way, and also in a sort, like a factory or something. Um, and also that we're managing behaviors, which are really just the manifestations of what's going on inside each individual as a human being, right? So anyway, I restorative practices is about um, focusing on the harm that's done when something happens, um, and rather than having some kind of punitive, arbitrary consequence
Mm-hmm.
on repairing the harm that's been done and restoring person who to the school or class community. So the sort of extreme example in the restorative justice within the like criminal justice system um, is the like teenage boys. This is a real thing that happened. Teenage boys that decided to burn down a bridge in their town. And they went through the restorative justice system. So rather than going to jail or whatever it would have been, they sat down in a meeting with people from the town, and everyone talked about, you know, the harm that it had caused to them
Mm-hmm.
and them personally. And then the victims talked, and then the people who had actually committed the arson had a chance to speak as well and to actually then ask for forgiveness. And then they came up with a plan where they rebuilt the bridge, and they did all these things. And the same thing happens in the classroom. Rather than you know you called Javier a name, so go sit out over there, or go to the principal's office or whatever, which does nothing other than remove them so that you aren't bothered by them anymore.
Right.
Um, so rather than that, it's about making them. It's actually, so people tend to think that this sort of system is more like touchy feely and therefore kind of wishy washy, but it's actually a lot harder
Mm-hmm.
because the child has to be able to take responsibility. And as a teacher, I'm trying to lead them towards that sense of personal responsibility and ownership of what they've done. And they have to face the real problem that they've created. So rather than going to a whole nother room and serving a detention, they have to look the person in the eye, and eventually the goal is and the hope is that they would apologize genuinely and come up with, together with the person that they harmed, come up with a way to repair that relationship. So it's restoring relationships. So anytime something happens, it's not just putting a band-aid, it's not just managing so that you can move on with your lesson and your plan that you have in your head that you're going to do, but restoring those relationships and building community.
I love that. I love that so much because I'm in agreement with the management. I've always hated the term classroom management because I like to tell teachers too that for me, it's more about relationships. And I feel like and I know, and then I get you probably get this too, the pushback, but I teach elementary music. How can I have a relationship with my students when I see 700 kids or whatever it is at your school? But it is about, it's your relationship with your students, but like you said, with them, with each other as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that because honestly, a lot of times what happens in my communication with a lot of elementary music teachers is even if you do send them out of the room to the principal, let's be honest, we don't always have the most supportive administrators. Not everybody has that. And if you do and you're listening to this, amazing. That's awesome. But there are certain, situations where you're responsible for the behavior in your classroom. You don't get a lot of support. And so even if you send them out, it's not really serving a purpose. And then the child's going to say, oh, they're not going to do anything anyway. So then that behavior will just continue. So I love what you said about they need to have ownership for their behavior and making them have eye contact. I don't like using the word making, but you know what I mean. Them,
Yeah.
them, them needing to have eye contact with the student who they, maybe harmed with their words. So in an elementary music class, I would love to ask that when you don't have a lot of time, yes, I know a lot of teachers are so focused, which you should be, on teaching the objectives and getting through everything. So it's so stressful because you see your classes so um, a limited amount of time. So how does this look in your classroom without you interrupting the flow of teaching? How does this work? You could just give even one example.
Yeah, so I mean, there is no without interrupting the flow of teaching because you have to let go of the notion that a student interrupting your plan
Mm-hmm.
is, first of all, necessarily a problem, and secondly, a waste of time because it's not. We're in the business of human beings, we're not in the business of lesson plans.
Right.
So, and I say that as the person known for the lesson planning. So,
No,
I
I love
believe in
that.
the lesson plans,
Yeah.
but that's not what we're in the business of. But um, so there are still, I lead these trainings around the state. I'm in charge of the behavior for my school building. I have, anyway, I've done a lot of work in this. That doesn't mean that I don't have, fights breaking out in my classroom, that I don't scrap a lesson plan for an entire 30-minute period because there's just too much happening. It still happens. It
Mhm.
happens regularly. But I think the big thing, the step that I had to take, and the step that I think teachers have to take at some point, is believing in the truth that if you are willing to set aside your lesson objectives or whatever it is, and take whatever time is necessary to truly address the character of the individual students and getting to know them in a real way, not just training them to do certain things. And I'm huge on procedures, and all of that is, and structure and all of that. But not just addressing it at a surface level, but really digging into it and believing and knowing that if you put in the time when it needs to be,
Mhm.
you're going to, over the course of the school year, end up having a lot more time to actually teach, because the little things you're not going to be constantly putting out fires all the time. Like I say, I still do have days when I don't get to a single one of the things that I wanted to. I spend the entire 30-minute period talking about a major social issue that has happened right before they walked into my room, that had nothing to do with anything that even happened in my class, but it's on their minds. I don't care. I could have, in those kinds of situations, decided this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to, the two kids that are crying, I'll send to the psychologist. And the, kids that are being obnoxious and like not paying attention, I'll go have them sit out because they're being rude and interrupting my teaching. And then I'm going to get on with my lesson. Fine. But obviously, those 5 kids that I sent out aren't learning anything, and they're going to still have whatever problem it was when they come back after music class to the room.
Mm.
And the rest of the kids, I guarantee you, 90% of them are going to be thinking about whatever this thing is for the entire lesson, and I'm going to be reteaching it anyway. So, better to build the trust and to build the skills and to build the relationships in the community and take whatever time it is that you need, and you end up gaining so much more time in the long run. Just to give you one, since you asked for a practical thing that I do in music classes, there's so many things, but one thing that is kind of a staple of restorative practices that I've been able to use in elementary music classes is the concept of a circle, and just getting kids used to sitting in a circle where everyone can see everyone else, and the procedure of having one person speaking at a time and everyone having a turn to speak. And there are kind of variations on that, but the idea being that you have one talking piece that gets passed around and everybody says something. So when you kind of hear about it in the trainings, of course, it's focused on social skills and, problem solving, or it's get to know you things at the beginning of the year or whatever. But, and I can do some of that, but a lot of what I do, I'm able to incorporate with stuff that I'm already would be teaching, and even going, so it can be something as simple as, and this actually gets really to the heart of what the new national core arts standards want to address, which is those higher order thinking skills and thinking about why dynamics, why composers do these things, and being able to articulate that is perfect for those kind of circle conversations. And saying, okay, which we're going to sing it 5 different ways, which way did you like and why, and you go around the circle. But it can even extend to things like drumming circles and other things that we already do in our music classes. You can take that same concept and apply it, and it really, especially obviously with any of this stuff, it works a million times better if you're not the only one in your building that's doing these things, because then the kids are getting used to it and they're building relationships outside of the little sliver of time that they have with you. But it can still, I started doing it before other people in my building did. There are a few other teachers in my building now that do, but we're not at all the whole building on board with that by any means. So it can still be effective.
Oh, definitely. No, I love that. And I was going to ask you about, when we talked about elementary music teachers saying it's hard to form a relationship with their students when they only see them for a limited amount of time. And that serves a dual purpose. And one of those is they're, without them even maybe realizing it, they're forming a relationship with each other by listening to each other talk and showing mutual respect. And yeah, that goes back to that. I feel like that is a big part of that too. But I love that sitting in a circle. It's true. They're forced to look at each other um, made to listen to the person next to them talk and take turns, which I think kids have even adults have a hard time doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it requires regular, just like anything else, it requires regular practice.
Yeah.
So, you start with little things like, okay, I want everyone, you're going to say one word, cupcakes or ice cream. You tell me which one is your favorite. And you go around the circle and everyone just says cupcakes or ice cream. And you do little things, but then you make it musical, like trumpet or violin. And you go around the circle and you say which one you like better. And that builds in the skills. A lot of teachers want to jump straight to, okay, well, I tried it. I had this conversation where we were trying to talk about like how we feel, why is it that we keep people keep interrupting the teacher in class? Well, you can't go straight to there and expect the kids to automatically be able to do these kinds of things. So it's little things just and building it in regularly to into what you're doing, you know.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's just like you said, practicing procedures, which
Right.
we all hate that with a passion, let's be honest. But it's the same thing when you practice your procedures with the kids. It's not just the beginning of the school year and then it's wham, bam, done. It's practicing it all year long and practicing it while you teach different skills or, hey, we're doing an instrument activity. What are the procedures for this? Well, the same thing is like you said for that too. It's kiddos learning in your classroom what your expectations are for that. They're going to be uncomfortable at first talking and and maybe it gets to the point where it's not just a one word answer, but tell me a sentence about whatever, or let's, and then it transfers to music, let's make a musical phrase. But it's
Hmm.
just getting them comfortable. And you're right, it's easy to give up, when it comes to anything in the classroom with teaching, classroom management, which there we go again. But with anything, once you feel like you try it and it's not working for maybe you've seen that particular class 2 or 3 times, you got to give it time. You got to
Yeah.
give time for those relationships to form and for the kids to get used to things you're doing because it just might be uncomfortable at first. Have you found that to be true when you started doing this more regularly with your students? Did it take a while?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And when I started doing it, the older ones had a harder time with it, and the younger ones are always quicker to take on new things like that because they're not as like self-aware and self-conscious.
Yes.
But now I've had those kids for a few years, and so they're more used to like this is just something that we do, and it's always fun. Um, I don't know if fun is the right word. It's always interesting to me to have, new kids come in to some of these, older grades of kids who've had me for a number of years now. And the first time they do something that I know was completely normal and, something that I would happen all the time 3 years ago, um, but that now is just like not a thing that we do in Miss Caldwell's class. Um, and everyone looks at them like, we don't do that here, like that is weird kind of thing.
Right.
Like, yes, this is, that's the kind of, community expectation. Um, like even things like when someone would perform and they would mess up really badly, and so then somebody else would like start laughing or make some kind of comment, and the rest of the class looked at them like, that's we don't do that here kind of.
I love
That's
that.
when you know you've gotten somewhere,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you have like a sense of what am I trying to say? You're just proud because you
Right.
students have been paying attention and you fostered that culture in your classroom that you've been wanting to. And so when new kids come in, I love that your students are like, well, no, this is not how this is our family in here is, this is the way it goes.
Right.
I love
Right. Right.
well, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, and I also want to talk to you about equity in music education. Before we started recording, told you I just love. If you do not follow Elizabeth on Instagram, you need to right now. After well, while you're listening to this or after you listen to this episode, because she on her Instagram story, well, all over Instagram, is amazing at posting. Honestly, in my opinion, posts that make you think and really stop and reflect and go, wow, that's actually a really good point. And so I would love to just let you get started and just explain what what equity in music education means to you. And yeah, we'll just start from there.
So I think my sort of digging into this came naturally out of just listening to and being in relationship with my students and with my school community. And so really everything comes back to that. And sort, listening to and really seeking to understand um, the human beings that I'm interacting with.
Mm.
And there's just a lot. So part of this also is I'm coming into the United States and into the American public school system as a bit of an outsider, because I grew up in a lot of different places, most significantly in Japanese public schools, and then all of my teaching experience at the beginning of my teaching career was in international schools in South Korea.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then I came from that here to my current school, so which was a big shift. Um, so I see things, I think, a little bit more as an outsider than some people may. And I
I love,
just,
by
I
the way, I
see,
can just plug that in there. I love that because I think that's a unique perspective.
it's, yeah, I try to be, anyway, but I don't know how to say what I was going to say.
No,
But
that's okay.
our town is really interesting that I teach and live in. I live in the town that I teach in, and we have this kind of long, narrow town that spans those railroad tracks. And so I teach on one side of the railroad tracks, and we have 9 elementary schools in our district. And so there's two or three of us schools that are on one side of the railroad tracks, and then the rest are on the other side.
Hmm.
And and then we have one middle school and we have one high school. And so I see um, a lot of the things that are being discussed in education and in politics in the United States right now playing out in real time in my students' lives.
Right.
And so that's really how I kind of came into it. But I think, yeah, it really comes back to, for me, equity is all about seeking to, well, I guess the process of creating equity in my classroom is all about listening to the students that are in my room, but also listening to the perspectives of as many different kinds of people all around the world as I can,
Mhm.
um, because it is about more than just the students that I have in front of me. It's also bringing perspectives from outside of what any of them represent as well, and introducing that and incorporating that into my classroom as well. But it's not about being blind to color or anything else. It's not about sameness. Um, it is about actually being more aware of, you know, background and culture and everything that, plays into who these people are, whoever it is that I'm interacting with, and learning how to interact with that. And that's also, that's maybe part of what I was getting at before. So I'm what's called a CCK. I'm a cross cultural kid. I'm a white American passport holder who culturally is not American at all. And so I've grown up as, what's called an alien. And so I'm kind of, a lot of Americans are familiar with like a Japanese American, so
Right.
someone who ethnically is Japanese but is American. And people are familiar, I think, with the common problem of, you know, people who will ask someone who looks East Asian, where are you from? And they say, well, I'm from such and such city in Kansas or wherever they're from. And they're like, no, 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 where are you really from? They're like, okay, no. So yeah, I have that problem, but in reverse. So it's it gives me, I think, a little bit of an ability to see, because I've grown up doing this, kind of see what cultural contexts are really playing into, the human behavior in front of me and how people are interacting and all of that.
Hmm. Yeah. So When it comes to, I love all that, by the way. Um, but when it comes to your elementary music classroom, how do you make sure all the different cultures are represented and all that everybody feels equal and that you are making sure that the music that they're familiar with is brought in and yeah, all those things. How do you make sure that happens in your music room?
So there's never, I'm never going to be able to represent everyone, every place, everything, every perspective,
Right.
first of all, but there is still an importance to, like I said, bringing in as many different perspectives as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a constant, you know, reflecting on what sorts of people are represented in the examples that I use. I've tried to be really conscious about, even when I do use some kind of typical folk songs, about getting away from always using Sally or Johnny. And, of course, like visuals that are up in the classroom and books that I read and things like that. I made we have them all over the school building now, some posters that just show like hand signals that we use for different things, like give me five and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I made sure that the hand that is in the picture on the poster had dark skin. And I had a sixth grade. I And it's one of those little things that, like, it makes me feel like I've done the right thing, but I don't know if anyone really cares or even notices.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then I had a sixth grade boy who was always at the front of the line because he needed to be there. And he I had one of the little miniature versions of the sign on the inside of the door where they face to line up at the end of class. And he was always like, you know, giving five to the hand or whatever. And sometimes I would like, please stop hitting the door. And eventually I started noticing that he would like even like stroke or just be like gazing at these pictures.
Yeah.
And one day he looked over at me when we were standing like waiting, I don't remember what, and he said, Miss Caldwell, how come that hand is mine? Like he honestly thought someone had like secretly taken a photograph of his hand and put it on the wall, and he was just enamored.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's
Mm-hmm.
just, and people notice these things.
Yeah.
But and it's genres. I've been doing a lot of work recently on trying to bring more hip hop, because that's such a big part of our culture, and our listening experience outside of music education, and yet it is so very left out of our classroom experience. That was another. I had another boy. These sixth grade boys, man.
They're very observant.
That Yes. Um, who he was major. He was very challenging. And it was one of my first years in this. Was it my very first year? And I'm trying to get through to these kids or whatever. So this is 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to ask him, so, you know, what what music do you like? He's like, I hate music. Okay, what music do you listen to? I don't listen to any music. I'm like, that is not humanly possible. No, I really don't. I hate all music. So I finally like gave up on the conversation. And then I saw him outside at dismissal with headphones on. So I ran up to him and I pulled out his headphones and I grabbed it and I stuck it in my ear and I'm like, aha! And he's like, oh yeah, but that's not like music class music. This is like music. And I was like,
Okay.
that's what I was trying to. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't think that they're the same thing. He honestly was trying to answer my question, and he honestly believed that I was talking about a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm.
So finding ways to, bring in different genres. And, one thing about not being able to do everything, I know I've worked a lot because of my sort of international experience. I've worked a lot with um, bringing in music from different cultures into my classroom for a long time. And one thing that teachers are always hesitant about is, well, I can't teach all these different countries well. So then they end up just doing none of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, learning, and this applies to genres and everything else that we're talking about right now, learning the skill of um, understanding a different culture from within. Like I talked about, that I learned from my own childhood, that's an acquired skill that you can apply to anything. It's just like when you learn a new language, learning how to speak French really well will help you later, if you decide you want to learn anything, Japanese, or whatever language you want to learn. But learning how to say, I had a friend who actually did this, learning how to say the word paperclip in every different language possible, while a very amusing party trick, is not going to help you in terms of your like linguistic ability or help you learn another language later on. It's the same thing with cultures, so I have one culture that I really dig into with each grade level. And they're not just learning about Brazil and Brazilian culture and Brazilian music, they're also learning how to take on another cultural perspective and how to participate in and seek to understand a different perspective from their own. And they can apply that later on to lots of other cultures. So, you know, pick, obviously, you want to have as much richness as you can, but I don't, I want to encourage teachers not to feel paralyzed by the need to incorporate everything,
Mm-hmm.
but rather to know that those skills are transferable.
Right. Yeah. And the goal is for your students to learn, like you said, other cultures. And
Yeah.
so I know it does get intimidating. I feel like that when I started bringing in different cultures in my classroom, I love how you said you did it though. You do a different culture with each grade level. I did it
Hmm.
for the month, but even then, because you don't see your students very often, I felt like we were rushing through everything and it was like not enough time to really, um, like you said, immerse themselves into that culture. So I love how you focus on one per grade level because then you have a lot more time to expand on that. And I love that.
Yeah.
Um, and so also bringing in hip hop music into the classroom,
Yeah.
touch on this a little bit. I feel like this is something that is intimidating a little bit to teachers because, you know, even in college, getting our music education degrees and any workshop you go to and any level or anything, um, which this is not a bad thing, but most of the time it's folk songs. And I just know I taught in a very, very urban school. And I remember trying some, traditional folk songs. And like we talked about earlier, anything that's new is unfamiliar and it's just going to take time. But I was just because I was still not comfortable with myself as a teacher. I remember just trying to do everything I had learned and wasn't really making it my own yet. And so I try to encourage teachers to make your teaching your own because you know your students better than anyone. But it was when I noticed I started bringing in hip hop music and other culture music. And then when I did, a folk song or folk dance or folk whatever, then they responded to it better because they knew it was, oh, well, we're not doing this all the time. We're doing other things too. And same thing with, I had my students writing raps. And I think just whatever you do when if you're listening to this, that it's okay to think outside the box. And it's okay to not do everything the same as everyone else. Now, this is not me telling everybody to go to these workshops and go, they told us not to do these songs. No, 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 that's not it at all. I think it's about having a well-rounded music education in your classroom. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think um, if you, this is where my kind of lesson planning hat comes on, but
Mm-hmm.
if you have a clear understanding of what concepts and skills it is you're trying to communicate, because that's really what we're doing as teachers, then you can use any material you want. I did a whole unit that ended up going on for about 2.5 months with my sixth graders, where I brought in a local hip hop artist, and we worked together. We were co-teaching the sixth grade class
I love
um,
that.
on hip hop music and on writing. We, were creating their own song and all of that. And I could, sort of quote, make the room in my curriculum, because I, could figure out, okay, so what concepts and skills am I going to be doing with that? So I'm just going to plug this in instead of the normal whatever it is that I've done before,
Mm-hmm.
for those skills and concepts. So the material can be anything really. And one thing I'll say too about hip hop specifically, and about how that ties into equity,
Mm-hmm.
is I think there's some perspective that hip hop is important, that you need to incorporate hip hop in your classroom if you're teaching Black kids,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're teaching, um, yeah, really that's what it is. So
Right, right.
people feel like if they're teaching Black kids, then they need to be using hip hop to reach these poor lost souls, and that's how you can bring them in, throw them some. I've heard teachers actually say this. They talk about how, like, they have to use pop songs, or any kind of contemporary music as like the candy to hook them in, and then they can get them to the real healthy diet of vegetables, which is the Western classical music. And that's dangerous thinking, and that's not equity work at all.
Right, right.
And so part of two, and I don't want to like scare people off here, but
No, no.
part two of bringing hip hop or anything else into your classroom is also really needs to come along with me as a teacher listening to and really seeking to understand what it is that I'm bringing into my classroom. And so for me, that really did necessitate bringing in the local hip hop artist. Like I said, I'm coming from Japan here, so I'm like not, I'm about the furthest thing you can get. I'm a white girl to begin with,
Yeah.
and I'm like inside East Asian. So I'm about the furthest thing you can get. And I just didn't grow up listening to hip hop music at all. I was listening to Japanese pop, and I was listening to other things, but not hip hop at all, ever.
Yeah.
So, that's been something I found a local hip hop radio station that the kids listen to a lot at my school. So I try to tune into that when I'm in my car, and just kind of let it become, part of my vocabulary, my musical vocabulary. And I find, like, I don't need to go read a bunch of books
Mm-hmm.
necessarily about, hip hop music and how to use it to teach certain concepts or whatever, so much as I need to just be able to understand it, because I know how to teach music,
Right.
but what I don't know is hip hop. And so if I can understand that as a genre, then I can do my part of knowing how to use that to teach music in my classroom.
I love that. I love that so much because It's okay to be unfamiliar with music, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable, or like you said, you never even had listened to hip hop music before, but you as a music teacher, of course, it's your job to teach these kids music, and you wanting them to be good humans, but also making sure that you're aware of what they're listening to so you can be familiar with it. And I think it's so funny because when you shock your students, you're like, oh, hey, I heard the new whoever's, I don't know, Beyonce song. And they're like, what?
Mhm.
You know who that is, and then they look at you kind of like it's a connection point. It goes back to having relationships with these kids.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
important. Well, I
yeah.
have loved this interview, and I'm so excited. I know this is going to really inspire a lot of teachers to kind of change their thinking a little bit and what they do in their classrooms. Before we go, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Um, I don't know. Yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation as well, and I wish we could keep talking for another 6 hours. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I guess I would say I love nothing more than being able to talk to music teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and would love to have people reach out to me. Um, there's all of my different contact information is on my website, which I know you're going to have somewhere. So
Go ahead and
I'd
tell us what
love
it is.
to.
What
It's
is your website? Yeah.
CaldwellOrganizedChaos.com.
Okay.
And yeah, I would love to connect with anyone that wants to talk more, because these are such big
Mm-hmm.
conversations, and it's ongoing work. And I'd love to talk to people about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm really excited for this interview for people to hear it. And so, thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you for
much.
having me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.